Have you ever sat in your favorite chair, cup of coffee in hand, and realized just how quiet the house has become? Not the peaceful kind of quiet. No, this quiet feels different. It's the kind that settles on your chest and stays there. Days go by, maybe even weeks, and the phone doesn't ring. No one stops by, and you start asking yourself a question you never thought you'd have to ask. Where did everyone go? You raised them. You gave everything: time, energy, love, sleep, patience, your youth. You helped with homework, showed up for every school concert, made dinners, folded clothes, stayed up through heartbreaks, breakups, and late-night fevers. And now it feels like all of that just lives in your memory. Let me tell you something. If this hits close to home, you are not alone. So many older adults, especially mothers, carry this quiet kind of grief that doesn't have a name. It's not the loss of a person, but the loss of presence. And it hurts. Not just because your kid stopped calling or visiting, but because, deep down, it makes you question your place in their lives. But here's the truth. That pain, that silence, it does not define your worth. Not as a mother, not as a person. You don't disappear just because others stop looking. Today, I want to talk to you like a friend. Not to offer shallow comfort, but real direction. I want to walk with you through 7 powerful things you can do when the calls stop coming and the visits become fewer and farther between. These aren't ways to manipulate or guilt anyone back into your life. This is about you, reclaiming your center, your dignity, and your voice. Let's begin with something that might sound simple, but it's actually the hardest. Stop chasing and start centering yourself again. When someone you love begins to drift away, the natural instinct is to reach out, to do more, to try harder. You start making excuses for them. They're just busy. I must have said something. They'll come around. So you call more. You offer help. You remind them of birthdays, anniversaries, little things just to keep the connection alive. But here's the thing. If you're doing all that from a place of emptiness, if you're giving just to be seen, you're not healing. You're just deepening the wound. You matter far beyond how often your phone rings. You're not a backup singer in someone else's life. You are the lead in your own story. So instead of spending your energy trying to be noticed, turn inward. Ask yourself, how do I want to feel today? What would bring me peace? What do I deserve? You might be surprised how foreign those questions feel at first, but they're essential. Because the first step in regaining your peace isn't about getting others to return your calls. It's about making sure you haven't stopped answering your own needs. Every time you value yourself, even in silence, you're rebuilding a foundation that no one can shake. Let me tell you about a woman I once met. Her name was Evelyn. She's 72, lives alone in a small town just outside Portland. She raised 3 kids on her own, worked 2 jobs, made every birthday special even when there wasn't money to spare. But as her kids grew, they moved away. One to New York, another to Arizona, and one only an hour's drive but just as distant. She told me, "The first few years I used to wait by the phone. I kept hoping. I'd bake pies when I thought they might visit just in case. But they didn't. And the silence started to feel heavier than anything I'd ever carried. But something shifted. Evelyn stopped baking for people who didn't show up. She stopped waiting by the phone. Instead, she started journaling. Every morning. Not about the pain, but about who she still was. What she loved. What she remembered about herself before she became just mom. She joined a watercolor group at the library, then volunteered at the local pet shelter once a week. Her life didn't suddenly become perfect, and the phone still didn't ring very often. But she began to smile more. Not because others saw her, but because she did. That's what I mean when I say center yourself. Don't disappear waiting to be remembered. Now, let's talk about something just as important. Stop justifying what hurts you. This one might hit hard, but it needs to be said. We are taught to be kind, to be understanding, to give the benefit of the doubt, especially when it comes to our children. So when they don't call, when they pull away, we start softening the blow with excuses. He's got a stressful job. She's raising her own family now. Maybe I said too much. Maybe I expect too much. But here's what you must remember. Making room for someone doesn't mean erasing yourself in the process. If something hurts, it's okay to name it. Saying out loud, "I feel abandoned," doesn't make you dramatic. It makes you honest. It makes you human. When you justify the unjustifiable, you begin to believe that you don't deserve anything more, that it's normal to be forgotten, that asking for a little care or connection is too much. That's not humility. That's fear in disguise. You are not here to be invisible. Start practicing this even if it feels small. The next time you hear yourself say, "It's fine," when it really isn't, pause. Take a breath. Speak the truth, even if it's just to yourself. No, it's not okay. I deserve better than this. You don't have to call anyone out. You don't need to have a confrontation. But you do need to stop covering up your own heartache with silence. This is how you begin to reclaim your life, not by blaming others, but by telling yourself the truth and standing in it with courage. And from here, something powerful begins to happen. The world doesn't change overnight. Your children might still be distant, but you start to change. You walk a little taller. You take up space again. You make choices for yourself, not based on who might call, but based on what brings you peace. You begin to notice it in the smallest ways. You wake up one morning and realize you didn't check your phone first thing, not because someone called, but because you've stopped expecting it. And that realization stings more than you'd like to admit. But in that sting, there's also a strange kind of strength, because somewhere deep inside, you're starting to understand that your life doesn't have to be built around waiting. This brings us to something that's both uncomfortable and incredibly freeing. It's time to rewrite the meaning of the relationship without needing constant presence. I know it's a tough thing to even consider. For years, maybe even decades, you were the center of your children's world. You fed them, guided them, picked them up when they fell. You were the default, the constant. And now, they're gone. Not because they stopped loving you necessarily, but because life pulled them in different directions. Or maybe because something broke and was never repaired. So what now? Do you close your heart? Pretend it doesn't matter? Grow bitter? No. You take that love, the same deep, powerful love you poured into raising them, and you transform it. You stop needing them to show up in order to feel connected. You shift the bond from being external and dependent to something internal and sacred. Think of it like this. For so many years, your relationship with your kids was like a well-tended garden. You watered it, pulled the weeds, made sure it bloomed. But now they've stopped visiting that garden. So what do? You don't burn it down. You don't let it die. You preserve it. You honor it, not for what it used to give you, but for what it meant and still means to you. You can still love them without making that love dependent on calls or visits. You can still be their mother, even if they don't act like your children. Because motherhood doesn't end when the phone goes silent. It evolves. And now it evolves into something that gives you peace, not pain. That's not being cold. That's not giving up. That's choosing your own emotional safety. When you make this shift, something amazing happens. You begin to live again, not just exist between rings of the phone. You find joy in moments that belong only to you. The sun through the kitchen window, a favorite book, a walk through the park. The taste of something sweet you made for yourself and no one else. Your life becomes yours again. But there's another trap that sneaks in quietly, and it's one I want to talk to you about right now. It's the voice in your head that says, "This is your fault." That silence means punishment. That absence means you're being judged or forgotten because you weren't enough. That voice can be cruel. It remembers every mistake, every harsh word, every time you were too tired or overwhelmed to be perfect. It tells you that maybe you're being ignored because you deserve it. And that voice, my friend, is lying to you. Yes, maybe you made mistakes. Who hasn't? No parent is perfect. You did your best with what you had when you had it. And parenting doesn't come with a handbook or do-overs. But guilt isn't the same as truth. And silence from your children is not a fair verdict on your worth. So, instead of letting that silence become a punishment, use it as a mirror. Ask yourself, what does this moment show me? Not just about them, but about you. What are you learning about your own needs, your boundaries, your capacity for love? What are you learning about your resilience? You may remember times when you weren't at your best. But you also need to remember the thousands of quiet acts of love that only you witnessed. The late-night lullabies, the scraped knees kissed, the bills paid with tears and sacrifice. Those count. They always have. Even if no one says thank you, even if no one calls. Because silence isn't always an accusation. Sometimes it's just space. And sometimes that space can become clarity. When you stop interpreting silence as shame and start seeing it as a chance to grow, to reflect, to heal, you take back your power. And that power is what leads us to something even deeper. Something many don't want to talk about but needs to be said. There's an invisible agreement that far too many of us have accepted without realizing it. It's the belief that we're only loved when we're useful. That affection has to be earned again and again, through service, through sacrifice, through silence. Maybe you've felt it. That quiet pressure to always be available. To say yes, even when you're exhausted. To be the peacemaker, the helper, the one who never asks for anything. You give, and in return, you might get a crumb of attention when someone needs something. That's not love. That's conditional loyalty. And it's time to break that pact. You don't have to prove your worth to be treated with kindness. You don't have to be useful to be valuable. You are allowed to say, "I matter," even when I'm not doing something for someone else. That may feel uncomfortable at first, but it's a truth that can liberate your soul. So the next time your phone is silent and your heart aches, ask yourself, are you waiting to be needed because that's the only way you think you'll be seen? Are you afraid that setting boundaries will mean losing what little attention you still receive? Because if the only way someone shows up in your life is when they want something, that's not a relationship. That's a transaction. And you, my dear friend, are not a transaction. You are not a service. You are not a background character in someone else's story. You are a whole person, deserving of love without needing to earn it. It starts with how you treat yourself. Say no when you need to. Stop explaining yourself. Make space for your own joy, not just others. And when someone only shows up when it's convenient, you are allowed to say, "Not this time. Not like this." It doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you start loving differently, freely, without the cost of your dignity. Let all of this settle in for a moment. And then, let's continue. Because we still have more to explore. And what's ahead may help shift how you view not only your relationships, but your life from this point forward. There's a quiet moment that sneaks up on you. Maybe it's while folding laundry or watching the wind blow through the trees. You realize, I've spent so much of my life being needed. Now that I'm not, who am I? And that right there is where the next shift must happen. You see, when you've measured your worth by what you've done for others, it can be terrifying when no one needs you anymore. But let me say this clearly. You are not done. You are not less valuable because you're no longer rushing around cooking meals, picking up grandchildren, or being someone's lifeline. You are still whole, still worthy, still alive. But you can't carry old wounds alone. Too many women your age believe they have to heal in silence. That to admit they feel forgotten or abandoned or used is a form of weakness. So they smile. They say, "I'm fine." They keep busy. They bury the ache under chores and to-do lists. But at night, when the lights go out, that ache is still there. Here's the truth, you don't have to do this alone. Whatever broke, whatever distance opened up between you and your children, it was formed in relationship. And many times, healing that kind of wound also needs relationship. Not necessarily with them, but with someone. Maybe it's a friend, a community group, a faith leader. Maybe it's a therapist or counselor. Maybe it's simply someone who listens without fixing. The point is, you were never meant to hold the weight of emotional abandonment by yourself. And carrying it alone doesn't make you strong. It makes you tired. It's okay to admit you need help, that you're confused, that you don't know what to do with all the love still inside you, with no place to put it. That's not weakness. That's courage. I know a woman named Linda. She lived alone in a small brick house after her husband passed. Her 2 sons both had families of their own. They weren't bad kids, just distant. Calls came once a month, if that. Holidays were short. And though she never said it out loud, the loneliness was thick. One Sunday after church, she opened up to another woman in the coffee hall. Nothing big, just a quiet, "I miss being needed." That simple sentence turned into weekly conversations. Then they started walking together, then hosting a small supper group. And little by little, Linda didn't just get by anymore. She began to live again. Not because her sons changed, but because she stopped hiding. You don't need everyone to understand you. Just 1 or 2 people who see you for who you really are. Find them. Let them in. Because healing is not a private act. It's a shared one. And when you begin to feel supported, really supported, not for what you can do, but for who you are, your whole inner world begins to shift. You stop living in reaction to other people's choices, and you start creating your own rhythm, your own reasons to smile, your own daily sense of purpose, which brings me to something both powerful and quiet. It's the decision to ask yourself one of the most important questions you may ever face. How do I want to be seen, even if no one is looking? That question isn't about appearances. It's not about putting on a brave face or pretending you've got it all figured out. It's about deciding who you are when there's no applause, no validation, no external confirmation that you matter. What do you see when you look in the mirror? A tired woman just waiting for her kids to call? Or someone who has survived every storm life has thrown her way and is still standing? Because you are still standing. And now, you get to choose how you carry yourself through the years ahead. You can walk in the shadow of what was, or you can walk in the light of what still can be. You don't need permission to be radiant. You don't need to shrink to be accepted. You don't need to silence your own voice so that others feel comfortable. This is your time, not to wait. Not to beg. Not to explain yourself one more time to people who aren't listening. But to live. You've already proven your love. You've already given. You've already been the glue, the rock, the sacrifice. Now you get to be something more. Yourself. That might mean saying no without guilt. Taking a class you always wanted. Traveling, even if it's just to the next town over. Dressing in colors that make you feel alive. Speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes. Doing things not because you're expected to, but because they light you up. And sure, some people may never notice. Some may never say thank you. Some may still be absent. But that's no longer what defines you. You define you. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not too late. You are not alone. And if these words are settling into your chest like sunlight instead of stones, then I want you to remember this. Your life is still happening. Right now. Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Right now. You get to shape it. And the beauty of it all? Once you start living from your truth, not from your fear, not from your old roles, not from who you used to be, you'll notice something incredible. You stop needing others to see you because you see you. And that kind of vision? It's the beginning of freedom. There's a quiet kind of strength in deciding your life will no longer revolve around who shows up or who doesn't. It's the strength that says, I am here. I matter. And I will no longer wait for someone else to make me feel that way. You might still feel that ache from time to time, that pang when you see other families gathered at the park, or when your neighbor gets a surprise visit from their daughter. That's okay. You're human. You have a heart. And a heart that's loved deeply doesn't shut off just because others stop showing up. But that ache doesn't have to control you. It doesn't have to define your days. You get to make a new choice now, not out of anger, not out of pride, but from a deep, steady place inside you that says, my life belongs to me. Maybe you start by waking up tomorrow and lighting a candle just for you, not for an occasion, not for anyone else, just to mark your own presence in this world. Maybe you step outside with your morning coffee and whisper a small prayer of gratitude for breath, for trees, for one more chance to live this day well. Maybe you open your closet and put on something that makes you feel good, not because anyone will see it, but because you will. You're the one who matters now. You're the one who gets to look at that reflection and say, there she is. There's the woman who's still standing. And maybe, just maybe, you sit down with a pen and paper and write yourself a letter. Not about regrets, but about truth. About what you've been through, what you've survived, what you're proud of, even if no one ever clapped for it. Write to the girl you once were, to the mother you became, to the woman you are now. Let the words remind you of everything you've carried and everything you've let go. Because letting go is not weakness. Letting go is courage. It means you're no longer chasing. You're no longer shrinking. You're no longer living a life based on crumbs of attention or one-sided hope. Letting go means this: I still love, but I also live. And that's the most beautiful part of this whole journey. Once you reclaim your voice, your center, your dignity, you start to love in a new way. Not a desperate, waiting kind of love, but a peaceful, rooted kind of love. A love that includes yourself. You no longer wait for the phone to ring to feel worthy. You no longer check your messages hoping to be remembered. You no longer tie your happiness to someone else's decision to show up or not. And here's something extraordinary. When you live like that, when you hold your head high and walk forward with peace in your step, you may notice that people do start to reach out again. But this time, it's different. It's not because you begged. It's not because you reminded them. It's because your energy changed. You stopped seeking. And that quiet strength draws people in. But whether they come back or not isn't the point anymore. The point is, you're back. You've returned to yourself. So let's pause right here and take a breath. Wherever you are, kitchen, couch, garden, porch, I want you to take that breath in deeply and feel what's still alive inside of you. That spark? It's still there. That light? Still flickering? It may have been dimmed, but it was never out. And from this moment on, you get to guard that light. You get to tend to it. Not just for your children, not just for anyone else, but for you, for the years ahead, for the version of yourself that refuses to fade quietly into the background, You are not too old to matter. You are not too late to change. You are not beyond becoming. And if this message has stirred something in you, if your heart is beating a little louder, if your eyes have welled up just a little, if a part of you feels like, yes, this is what I've needed to hear, then take that feeling and carry it with you. Don't let it stay as a passing thought. Let it become a decision. A decision to stop waiting to be chosen. A decision to stop explaining your worth. A decision to start living like your life still counts, because it does. I want to invite you now to do two simple things. First, in the comments below, if you felt unseen or forgotten, write the words, "I no longer wait to be seen." Let those words be your declaration, not just to others, but to yourself. Because when you stop waiting for someone else to validate your life, you start to truly live it. Second, if you found strength, clarity, or even just comfort in these words today, take a second to like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We don't create content to fill space. We create it for women like you, for voices that deserve to be heard, for stories that still deserve to unfold. And if you know someone who needs this message, someone who's been carrying silent pain, who's forgotten just how much they matter, share this video with her. Sometimes one honest word is all it takes to crack the shell of loneliness. To every woman listening, you are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are worthy of joy, of peace, of a life that feels like your own again. So here's to you, to the woman rebuilding from the quiet, to the woman no longer measuring her worth by missed calls, to the woman choosing herself fully and finally. Here's to living your best life at any age.